Hey, last week I was actually at a church in Illinois, a sister church of ours, trying to help them. They've been going through a rough season and went out there to serve them. I got to preach out there, which was cool to serve one of our sister churches and help them out. But I got to tell you, I was really looking forward to being back here. I was like, hey, this is great. I can't wait to get back to LifeBridge. And especially getting back from central Illinois to Colorado, there's no comparison. But I missed you guys, and I was excited to be back here today. And like what Yuan talked about, I'm excited about what's coming. We've got so many different things going on in our church. Some of you know all of it. Some of you are like, what? Well, we're going to keep explaining. One thing that's coming up is we have this thing on March 31st. It's called Easter. That's happening, which is crazy that it's almost here. And let me cast a little bit of vision for Easter for you. We'll have 3 services that Sunday morning, 8 o'clock, 9:30, and then 11:15. If you call LifeBridge home, I want to encourage you to either go to the 8 o'clock or the 11:15 service. The 9:30 service we know is going to be slammed. There's going to be a ton of people here. That's usually the most attended service for guests. We're going to have an overflow section, but we don't want to have people going to overflow. We want them here in this room. So this is a way that you can actually serve people, is by going either earlier or going later. Here's what Christianity is. Christianity is a race to the back of the line. That's what we do. One of the ways that we can do that on Easter, if you call this home, is go to 8 o'clock or go to 11:15. If this is all new to you, if you're a guest, if this is your first time, you go to whatever service you want. You get to be at whatever one you want. But hey, if we call this place home, this is something that we get to do. We get to go earlier or we go later. So I want to encourage you to do that. On top of that, right after Easter, 2 weeks later, we're going to start something called Rooted. Some of you have been through Rooted before. This is something we haven't done as a church in about 3 or 4 years. Rooted is a 10-week experience on what it looks like to follow Jesus. We're going to get into some principles in Scripture. Hey, how do we actually live this out? You'll be put into a small group of people so you can develop more relationships. You'll have a leader there. So I want to encourage you, if you've never been through Rooted before, or if you're new to LifeBridge and you're looking for ways to connect, this is an awesome, awesome way to do it. You can go to our website, sign up. You can go to New Here and sign up, and we'll start that 2 weeks after Easter. If you're in a small group right now, do you need to be a part of Rooted? You don't have to. You can if you want, right? This is a great way to get connected into small groups. So I would highly encourage you to sign up for Rooted. And maybe some of you, your next step is actually to lead a Rooted group. We got you covered. We'll help set you up for that, facilitate and lead a group. Maybe that's your next step. So I want to put that in front of you too and want you to wrestle with that and pray about that. And maybe that's what you need to do. So that's coming right after Easter, which is coming quickly, not only with the calendar, but Easter is also coming quickly with where we're at in John. We've been moving through the Gospel of John, and we're right up to the crucifixion and the resurrection. And something that's been sown throughout John is this kingdom principle that Jesus is going to live out more and more and display it more and more, especially at the crucifixion. It's a principle for how the kingdom of heaven actually works. Let me set it up this way. In the 1930s, farmers in Oklahoma had an incredibly difficult decision to make. The 1920s had been awesome. Lots of rain, which meant abundant harvest. Crops were awesome. The 20s were great. That actually caused a lot of people that were on the East Coast, living in the cities, working factory jobs, to leave that and then move out to the booming Midwest to try to make money. And then the stock market crash in October of 1929, that just sped all of that up. If they were on the fence about, hey, do we leave the city? Do we go try to farm? The stock market crash just helped people out the door, and people flooded out to the Midwest to try to farm. But by 1931, the rains stopped completely. Everything got incredibly dry. Plus, years of bad farming practices created these massive dust storms that eliminated it and just wiped out any remaining fields that happened to be doing well. That time period, that whole region of the country became known as the Dust Bowl. On top of that, we're in the middle of a Great Depression. By 1939, thousands and thousands of farmers were broke, just flat out broke. Many of them left to go back to the East Coast with empty hands because they had to. The few that remained had very, very difficult decisions to make. One decision was, hey, do we just take the remaining grain that we have and use that to feed our families? We have enough for maybe a year. We can feed our families for about a year, but that means we're not going to have a harvest at all. That's one decision. Or the other decision was, do we go ahead and use the last of our grain and plant? Do we do that hoping that there will be a harvest? But if we do that and it doesn't rain, then our families won't survive. Incredibly difficult decision to make. Well, many made the decision to plant in faith. And then by the fall of 1939, the rains came. This was the principle. If you're going to gain, you have to be willing to lose. That's a kingdom of heaven principle, gaining by losing. I mean, look what's happened with Jesus with this. So he just gets betrayed by a guy that he invested multiple years of ministry in. A guy that just a few hours ago, Jesus washed that dude's feet. A guy that was not only supposed to be one of his disciples, but actually supposed to be one of his friends. Well, that guy ends up betraying him. Then Jesus gets arrested. Then he gets lied about. Then he gets tried illegally. That whole trial at Caiaphas' house, that was illegal according to Jewish law. And then on top of that, to make it all even worse, one of the guys that Jesus spent the most energy with, one of the three that he was the most intentionally, relationally close with, a guy that he invested ministry in for 3 years, a guy that he poured himself into, that guy says, you know what? 3 times in one night, I don't even know who Jesus is. Just denies him. What are you talking about? I don't know who that guy is. So then they take Jesus, the Jewish leaders, they take Jesus to this guy named Pilate. Pilate was the Roman governor of Judea, and they take Jesus to Pilate. Pilate comes out and says, okay, what accusation do you make against this man? And the Jewish leaders are like, well, we didn't bring him to you unless we knew he was a criminal. Now, Pilate doesn't want anything to do with this. He's rubbing his forehead. He's sighing dramatically because he doesn't want to deal with Jesus. He wants nothing to do with this. So he says, okay, you know what? All right, that's fine. Just why don't you guys go ahead and take him and judge him according to your law. It's fine. But they can't because they want to kill him. And according to Roman law, they're not allowed to execute anyone unless they get permission from the Roman governor. That's Pilate. So here's what goes down. This is John 18, verse 33. Then Pilate went back into his headquarters and called for Jesus to be brought to him. Are you the king of the Jews? He asked. And Jesus said, is that your own question, or did others tell you about me? Am I a Jew? Pilate retorted. Your own people and their leading priests, they brought you to me for trial. Why? Like, what have you done? Jesus answered, my kingdom is not an earthly kingdom. If it were, my followers would fight to keep me from being handed over to the Jewish leaders. But my kingdom is not of this world. Pilate said, so you are a king then? Jesus said, you say I'm a king. Actually, I was born and came into the world to testify to the truth. All who love the truth and recognize it, they recognize what I say is true. So Pilate might have been being very sarcastic and dismissive in what he's saying to Jesus. He might not have cared at all about the question he asked Jesus, but the question he asked is a question that everybody's going to have to answer. This whole idea about is Jesus the king of the Jews or not? Boil it down, the question is Jesus king? Is Jesus king? Pilate's going to have to answer that question. Everyone has to answer that question. I have to answer this question, and so do you. And hear me on this. How you answer this question will determine everything about you. How you answer this question is the most important thing about you. And it's a question that cannot be avoided. Pilate's trying to avoid it. You cannot avoid this question. And it's also a question that you can't have other people answer for you. Like, your spouse cannot answer this question for you. Your friends cannot answer this question for you. Your parents can't answer this question for you. How you were raised does not answer this question for you. Your church can't answer this question for you. You have to answer it. Is Jesus king? But before you answer it, let me ask you a different question. Because we can almost say yes to that in this setting. Well, yeah, Matt, of course Jesus is king. We're in church, bro, and you've told us to say Jesus anytime you ask a question. Like, I know, I've set you up for that. But saying yes to Jesus being king in this setting, that can almost be, we can almost answer yes out of obligation. So let me ask you a slightly different question that will help get clarity. Who's sitting on your throne? Because you have one king and you have one throne. Everybody does. Whoever's sitting on your throne, that's who your king really is. And you're really good at lying to yourself, so am I, about who your king really is. But who's actually sitting on your throne? You can't lie to yourself about that. Who's sitting on your throne will tell you who your king really is. When it comes to your throne, is it you? Are you sitting on your own throne? And this is an incredibly popular option, especially today in a culture where the dominant religion now is humanism, where self is king, where the greatest good is self-actualization. Meaning, hey, the greatest good is actually doing whatever feels good to you in the moment. Because if it feels right, if it feels good, then it must be right. And besides, what king, what queen would not do whatever feels good and feels right to them? So are you sitting on your own throne? Or is it money? It's an easy one to point to. Is money what drives you? Is it what you think about? Is it what you worry about? Does most of your mental and emotional energy go into money? Is that sitting on your throne? Or is it your career? Is that sitting on your throne? Like where you're at, what you're doing, where you want to be, the business you're trying to build, is that sitting on your throne? And if you're not sure and you're married, ask your spouse to answer that question for you. If you're not married, ask your friends to answer that question for you. Or is power and prestige, recognition, is that sitting on your throne? Certainly was for Pilate. That dude wanted power. He wanted to be recognized in life. I mean, maybe you have this unhealthy need to be affirmed and recognized. Is that sitting on your throne? Or is it politics? Is a political leader or a political party sitting on your throne? And whenever we do that, we get into this mindset where, hey, this person or this party is actually going to be what saves us. We end up putting so much mental and emotional energy in that party or that candidate, and that's one of the reasons why an election year becomes so volatile. Because now this candidate or this party that's sitting on your throne is being threatened by another candidate or another party. And the only thing we know how to do in response is to lash out because we've been conditioned to do that. I mean, those are all just examples. There could be all different kinds of things or people that are sitting on your throne. Just be honest with yourself. Like, what's really sitting on your throne? Because whoever that is, that's who your king really is. And if you have anyone or anything other than Jesus sitting on your throne, then eventually what's going to happen is you're going to rebel, revolt, and flat out reject Jesus because now he's a threat to your throne. That's one of the problems the Jewish leaders had with him. So is Jesus king? Pilate didn't want to answer that question. He didn't want to hear the answer to that question. So he asks another question. He says, what is truth? I think that's a big one. What is truth? Then he went out again to the people and told them, he's not guilty of any crime. But you have this custom of asking me to release one prisoner each year at Passover. So, would you like me to release the king of the Jews? But they shouted back, no, not this man. We want Barabbas. Barabbas was just a distraction. That's all he was. He was a distraction because Pilate was avoiding. Pilate was avoiding the authority and the truth about Jesus. He didn't want anything to do with Jesus. He didn't want to hear the answer to that question, even if it was rhetorical, because if he hears the answer to that question, he's got to respond to it. So Barabbas was just a distraction. He's using him to let go of Jesus. By letting go of Jesus, then Pilate can avoid the authority and truth of Jesus. Pilate's avoiding. The crowd, that's not what they're doing though. The crowd's attacking. So here's what happens. Put yourself in this scene. Pilate has Jesus beaten within an inch of his life. It was a type of beating that a lot of people didn't even survive. Forget the cross. Most people died in the beating. Pilate has him beaten. As soon as that's done, the Roman soldiers decide, you know what, let's have some fun with this. They take some thorns and they make this makeshift crown out of that and they shove it down on top of his head. One of the Roman guards grabs a spear and uses the butt of his spear to push it down even farther down so that the thorns start piercing his scalp. Then they grab a purple robe to mock him even more. They wrap it around his shoulders. As they laugh, they start saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" while they all take turns punching him in the face. Then Pilate brings him back out looking like that to the crowd. Jesus is bleeding. You see blood streaming down from his scalp where the thorns have pierced. His face is swollen, probably contorted. the purple robe, the scratchy purple robe that they wrapped around his back is rubbing up against exposed flesh from his beating. Pilate brings him back out in front of the crowd like that, and he says, "Behold the man," thinking that they'll back off now. Pilate wants nothing to do with this. He thinks that, once they see Jesus all torn up, maybe they'll back off then. Like, oh gosh, that is a lot. Okay, we're good. But some of the chief priests, they double down. They start screaming, "Crucify him!" And they start rallying up the crowd to do the same thing. They stir up the crowd to say the same thing. So 1,000 people in unison start saying it louder and louder. "Crucify him! Crucify him! Crucify him!" It wasn't the reaction Pilate was looking for. He's taken back by this. So he brings Jesus back inside and he says, "Where are you from?" Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "Will you not speak to me now? Do you not know that I have the authority to release you and the authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me at all unless it was given to you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin." From then on, Pilate sought to release him. But the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend." That's a threat, and Pilate knows it. "Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out. He sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement. Now it was the day before the preparation for Passover. It was about the 6th hour. That's about noon. And he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." And they cried out, "Away with him, crucify him." And Pilate said, "Shall I crucify your king?" And then the chief priest answered, "We have no king but Caesar." It's sold out. We have no king but Caesar. So he delivered him over to be crucified. It's really easy to watch this and start playing armchair quarterback. Like it's really easy to watch that and point a finger at Pilate and say, "Bro, you're a coward. You're weak." Because all you're doing is placating to the crowd. And he was. It's exactly what he was doing. Like Pilate didn't want any of this. He didn't want his career to be messed with. He knew that one more stir-up, one more possible riot in Judea, that might not only cost him his job, that might cost him his life. He didn't want anything to do with that. So he's not going to do what's right, because doing what's right might mean there's consequences. Pilate knows the right thing to do is to release Jesus. He tries to let him go multiple times. He knows the right thing to do is to let him go, but the right thing might mean consequences. Pilate doesn't want to suffer consequences for doing what's right, so he's more than willing to let Jesus suffer those consequences for him. That's weakness. And hear me on this. We're seeing this played out right now, just the same thing that Pilate did. When men are weak, innocent people get hurt. That's throughout history, and it's going on right now. When men are weak, innocent people get hurt. An innocent man was crucified because another man was weak. But I could do the same thing. I could do the same thing that Pilate did. I could be in any given situation and not do the right thing because I'm afraid of what it might cost me. Like, I'm no different. I'm no better than Pilate. And then it's also easy to look at the Jews in this and say, really? Like, how did you guys miss this? How did you not see that Jesus is the Messiah? You've been waiting for him for like 1,500 years. The entire Old Testament points to him. You have all the prophecies about the Messiah memorized, and you just saw them all lived out in front of you. How did you miss this? How do you say, away with him? And if that's not bad enough, how do you start screaming for him to be crucified? I could do the same thing. I could also say, away with him. God forbid I never articulate that verbally. I mean, right now, it's easy for me to stand here right now and say, Jesus is king. And I 100% with every fiber of my being believe that Jesus is king. But when I go home later today and nobody's around me and I'm by myself, the way I live when nobody's around me, does the way I live say away with Jesus? Or what I think about, does that say away with Jesus? Or how I talk, does that say away with Jesus? Man, the way I live, does that say away with Jesus? I could easily do the same thing. Man, the point is, I'm just as vulnerable, and so are you. I'm just as vulnerable to do the exact same thing that Pilate did or the crowd did. So 2 things to remember then. Number 1, who your king is brings out who you really are. Whoever your king is will bring out who you really are. For Pilate, it was political ambition and wealth. That dude wanted to get rich. He wanted to climb the ladder. Get this, Pilate actually married the granddaughter of Caesar Augustus. He tried to marry into power. He was trying to set himself up. Like, we all know what a gold digger is. What's the equivalent for someone who wants power? That was Pilate. He wanted wealth. He wanted political ambition. Now that's being threatened. That was on his throne. So he wants to avoid a riot because he doesn't want his king to be threatened. For the Jews, what was sitting on their throne in that crowd was their own power. They wanted to sit on the throne themselves. So let's just get rid of this threat. Both of them, Pilate and the crowd, who their king really was, drove what they did. And the same thing is true for you and I. Like, if you are your own king, if you are sitting on your own throne, you know what's going to come out of you? Pride. Pride's going to come out of you. It's going to drive you. So will entitlement. Entitlement will come out of you if you are your own king. And then eventually, you'll just become a full-blown narcissist. And I don't think that's overstating it. That's the progression if you're sitting on your own throne. If I'm sitting on my own throne, eventually I'm going to become a narcissist. Or if politics are sitting on your own throne, you know what's going to come out of you in 2024? Anger. Anger is going to come out of you. So will divisiveness. If you're being discipled by Fox News or CNN, if the Republican Party or the Democrat Party is sitting on your throne, then the only thing that's going to come out of you is anger and division. Why? Because American politics is divided and angry, is it not? So if that's your king, of course that's going to come out of you too. If Jesus is your king, if that's who's sitting on your throne, you know what's going to come out of you? Humility. Love's going to come out of you. Peace is going to come out of you. Patience is going to come out of you. Joy is going to come out of you. Faithfulness, goodness, kindness, gentleness, self-control is going to come out of you. If Jesus is your king, you're going to start to look like him. You're going to act like him. You're going to talk like him. You're going to think like him. The desires of your heart will actually be his desires. But whoever your king is will bring out who you really are. So if you're still not sure who's sitting on your throne, reverse engineer what's coming out of you. Like, whatever it is that comes out of you, reverse engineer that back. You're going to find out who your king really is. Second thing, who your king is decides what you do with the truth. Whoever your king is will decide what you're doing with the truth. If you have anyone or anything other than Jesus on your throne, then when it comes to authority and it comes to truth, you will either avoid it or you will attack it. Pilate avoided, the crowd attacked. Jesus is God. That means he has authority. Pilate was confused by that. He was totally confused by that. He's like, well, I've got the authority to let you go. I've got the authority to kill you. But Jesus was very clear in John 10. He says, no one takes my life from me. John 10:18. I sacrifice it voluntarily. I have the authority, not Pilate, not the crowd, not you, Matt. I have the authority to lay it down and the authority to pick it back up whenever I want. Pilate was confused by that authority. The Jews just flat out rejected it. And then there's this existential question that Pilate asked. What is truth? What's ironic and pretty funny about him asking that question is that the answer to that question was standing right in front of him. He shouldn't have asked, what is truth? He should have asked, who is truth? Truth is a person. And he was standing in front of Pilate. Jesus was clear, John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. That is one of the most freeing and one of the most offensive verses in the entire Bible. It's offensive because it sounds exclusive. Wait, Matt, are you telling me there's one way? Are you discounting, are you ignoring all of these other religions? Are you saying that this belief system or that value system or this ideology, that no, none of that, there's just one way? That sounds incredibly exclusive. And my answer to that would be, it absolutely is. Is the gospel of Jesus Christ exclusive? 100% it is. But that's freeing because now you don't have to guess. You don't have to guess, is it this way or is it that way? Do I have to buy into this narrative? Do I have to line up with this ideology? Do I have to adhere to these values? Do I have to adopt these religions? Do I just a la carte the whole thing and pick for a little bit from everything? No, it's one way. It's Jesus. That's it. That's freeing. Now you don't have to guess. Now the great news also with that is, it is exclusive, but it's also entirely inclusive in that it's for everyone. The truth is for you, it's for me, it's for everyone that lives out there, it's for everyone. But you and I, we don't get to manipulate it. We don't get to change it. We don't get to try to compromise it and conform it to fit what we want. The world and Satan will try to get you to reject Jesus. But if you won't, they'll take the next best thing. If you're not going to flat out reject Jesus altogether, cool. We don't mind you worshiping Jesus as long as it's a Jesus created in your own image. A Jesus that thinks like you, that acts like you, that affirms everything that you do, everything that you feel, everything that you want. Yeah, go ahead and worship that Jesus. The problem is, that's not the biblical Jesus. It's not the real Jesus. Truth has been avoided and attacked, not just when Jesus showed up on the scene, but all the way back to Genesis 3. And if you've been here for a while, you've heard me talk about this a lot because I always want to put this in front of you. I want you to see it. I want you to be able to recognize it. I want you to be equipped, and I want you to be encouraged. Truth was attacked when Satan said in Genesis 3, did God really say? That was the first attack on the truth of God's word, and it's been going on ever since. And it will not stop until Jesus comes back. You're going to have that presented to you every single day. Did God really say? And it's going to look totally different every single day. I want you to recognize it. Two of the most popular attacks today would be, one, truth is relative, that it's subjective. The truth is whatever you want it to be, you get to define it, and truth is yours. But by definition, truth is constant, meaning it cannot change. And it cannot be just yours. It's really popular right now to say, I'm going to live my truth, or you live your truth. You've heard that, right? But there are no possessive pronouns in front of truth. There's the truth, singular. It's constant, it doesn't change, but it's for everyone. And the second popular attack, did God really say, is to say right now that there is no truth at all. This is really popular, and I've said this to you before. To say that there is no truth, that statement in and of itself is a truth statement. Whenever there is no standard or acknowledgement of truth, then there is no moral basis for right and wrong. And whenever there's no moral basis for right and wrong, that's when everything starts to fall apart. And the fallout is destructive and harmful, not just for an individual person, but collectively for mankind. That's what we're seeing happening right now in real time. There's no acknowledgement or standard for truth, which means there's no moral basis for right and wrong, which means everything starts to fall apart. We're seeing it happen around us right now. The fallout in John 19, because there was no moral basis for right and wrong, because there was no acknowledgement of truth, the fallout in John 19 was an innocent man was crucified. Because they rejected his authority, they denied the truth, and they wanted the throne for themselves. Jesus was a threat to that, so let's get rid of him. But what they didn't realize in that moment was that this is exactly how the kingdom of heaven works. This is exactly how it works. I mean, in that moment, you would think that Jesus standing there, broken, bleeding, bruised up, you would think that he's just lost his kingdom. That he's not prepared to take a throne in this moment. Like any king is probably losing his kingdom if he's being stripped naked and publicly crucified. But this is exactly how the true king takes the throne. The one true king takes his throne by willingly suffering and sacrificing himself. That's how the kingdom of heaven works, gaining by losing. And you and I are going to do both. Throughout your life, you're going to have seasons where you're losing, and you're going to have seasons where you're gaining. But you get a choice, I get a choice. We get to decide what order those two things go in. Are you going to lose because you're trying to gain, or are you going to gain because you're trying to lose? Pilate was trying to gain by being a people pleaser. And in the end, he absolutely lost. The crowd was trying to gain by eliminating the threat. They also lost. They never got the throne like they thought they would. And what makes it even worse is not only did they lose, but we're still talking about them today. Almost 2,000 years later, they're remembered throughout history for not just losing, but now they're remembered in infamy. Jesus said, whoever would lose his life, whoever gain his life, will lose it, but whoever would lose his life for my sake will gain it. And then he also said, a seed that does not go into the ground and die cannot produce a harvest. Gaining by losing. That's how the kingdom works. So I want to go back and I want to ask you one more time. Answer this to yourself. This is just for you. And be honest with yourself. Who's sitting on your throne? Who's sitting on your throne? Is it you? Is it someone or something else? Is it Jesus? I mean, we would all say that life is a little chaotic right now, would we not? Like, I don't know what you walked in here today with. I mean, we got something going on right now personally that nobody else knows about. And it's hard. It's painful. Maybe you got something going on with some friends or something at work. Maybe you got some family stuff that's just, it's rough. I don't know what you brought in here today, but I do know this. All of us have to face the crazy in this world. And all of us go through rough times. I think right now, this is the way I feel. It just seems like there's so much division and confusion and angst right now. Is that fair? Would you agree with that? There's just fear, right? There's fear of what's going to happen next with fill in the blank. I mean, if you're in your 20s, are you afraid that, man, I don't know how I'm going to buy a house? Or fear with what's going to happen next with global conflicts? Israel, Hamas, Russia, Ukraine. Fear of what the Broncos are going to do with their draft picks. It's real, right? Are we going to keep Russell? What are we going to do? There's just a lot of fear right now. But here's the cool thing that you can see in this story. If you know who the king is, and you've given him your throne, then you can stay calm, cool, collected in the middle of chaos and crisis. But take heart, for I have overcome the world. Jesus already made that clear, and he's proving it right here. I mean, just watch what he's doing. Jesus is just standing there chill, like nothing's happening. He's not freaking out. If anybody had a reason to freak out, it's the guy who has a crown of thorns shoved on his head while 1,000 people are screaming for him to be crucified. But he's not. If Jesus is not freaking out right here, that means you and I don't have to freak out with whatever we're facing. He's already overcome the world. In fact, he's the only one that's free in this entire story. Pilate's not free. Right? He's captured by his fear. Am I going to get killed? Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to lose this power? Am I going to lose the money that I'm wanting? He's captured by that. The crowd isn't free either. As long as Jesus exists, man, they can't have what they want. They can't be their own kings. The only person who's free right here is the suffering king. Why? Because he knows he has authority. He knows the throne is his, and he knows that he is truth. The question is, do you know that too? Because if you do, that's incredibly comforting. That's incredibly freeing. It's massively encouraging. And then here's how it plays out. So they took Jesus away. Carrying the cross by himself, he went to the place called the place of the skull. In Hebrew, that means Golgotha. There they nailed him to a cross. 2 others were crucified with him, one on either side with Jesus between them. And Pilate posted a sign on the cross that read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Pilate had no idea how right he was. And if you've heard this story more times than you can remember, please don't gloss over this part. And if you've never heard this story before, hear me on this. You and I are represented in this story far more than we realize. Like, first of all, you and I, we are Barabbas. You and I are Barabbas. I could scratch out Barabbas' name in my Bible and write Matt right there. So could you. Jesus should have been the one that was released. We should be paying the penalty of our own sin and letting him go free. But because of the cross, if you put your faith and trust in Jesus and turn from your sin, you get released too. There's freedom in that. Barabbas was a robber, an insurrectionist, and a murderer. Should he go free? No. Just like you and I, because of our own personal sins, we're just as bad. But because of the cross, we get to go free. That's great news. Second thing, we also have to answer that question. Are you the King of the Jews? Is Jesus King? You and I have to answer that question. We also have to deal with truth. Truth has been put in front of us. It's not a concept, it's a person. He's standing right there. Now you have to decide, am I going to accept the truth or am I going to avoid it or reject it and attack it? And then the last piece, I hope you see how loved you are in this. If you ever wonder, and maybe you're here right now for this, if you ever wonder, am I loved? If you ever wonder, does anybody see me? Does anybody know that I exist? If you ever wonder, do I have any value or worth or matter at all? Behold the man. He's standing there bleeding, bruised, with a crown of thorns on his head. And in that moment, the crowd was screaming, kill him! But in that moment, he was whispering to you, I love you. I love you. The robe, the thorns, the bruises, and the blood, all prove that he loves you. He went to the cross before you even drew your first breath. And at the cross, Jesus had no buyer's remorse for you. Doesn't matter where you're at, what your story is, what's happened to you, what you've done, what you've said, where you're at right now. He has no buyer's remorse when he went to the cross for you. That's love. That's our King. That's who has authority. That's who's sitting on the throne. And that's the truth. That's the truth. Let me pray for us. Jesus, you are King. You are the King of Kings. You are Lord of Lords. You are God in heaven. You are the creator of the universe. You are our creator. We give you all praise and glory and thank you for standing there. How you stood there and were quiet. How you stood there with such humility and strength is something that we can never comprehend. Thank you is not enough. There are no words that we have that could express how thankful or grateful we are or should be to you. But we are. I pray that you would speak to everyone in this room as individuals, everyone joining us online. Show yourself as King. And if there's anything else that we've put on our thrones, would you graciously show us that so that we can remove it and you can take the throne. We love you, Jesus. It's in your precious name we pray. Amen.